Hi, I've got something rather interesting to share with you. There's been a lot of information online about this already, but this is personal to me, so I wanted to share with you a little bit of my experience. Christmas of 1983 was a special time for a lot of people in my generation. It was a time in or around that period when a lot of us found a Commodore 64 underneath the Christmas tree. I was very excited, especially because not only did I have the Commodore 64, my parents, my father in particular, surprised me with the 1541 floppy disk drive, not the typical cassette drive that accompanied a lot of these computers back then, but an actual floppy disk drive, 5¼ inch. And also the Commodore 64 official display. So while a lot of folks and a lot of my friends would connect their Commodore 64 computers, a computer inside of a keyboard, for those who aren't familiar, to a television in their house over a composite video cable. Remember when we used to have those? I actually had a dedicated display. I think it was around about 13 inches, had a built-in speaker. And it had separate cables for the luminance and chrominance so that so the video clarity was a little bit better than what you would get just out of a normal composite video cable. So a lot of fun. I learned a lot on that computer. I'll be honest, I wasn't a heavy-duty assembly language programmer, but it did inspire a lifelong curiosity of technology, and has really kind of set me on the path for learning more about computers, and kind of arriving at where I am in my career today. I think that if that particular gift hadn't shown up under my tree, my career trajectory would have been very different. So I'm very grateful for that happening. So what I have here today is, and you've probably seen a lot about this, but this is the Pi 400. It's like the Commodore 64. It's a computer that's entirely inside of a keyboard. You can see some information here about kind of the ins and outs that are pictured on this box. The box kind of shows you what this thing looks like from different angles. I mean, really, it's just a Raspberry Pi that's been put in a keyboard case. But again, for folks of my generation who grew up with such things, seeing something like this remade again is just very exciting. So what I'm going to attempt to do is unbox this thing and power it up for the first time live. I haven't opened the box yet, so it'll be very interesting to see if this works at all. And if it does, maybe I'll post this video. If it doesn't, this will just have been something fun that I experimented with. So with that background, I'm going to go ahead and get started at opening this thing. First, I'll make myself a little bit smaller, and this camera might let you see a little bit of what I'm doing as I open this thing. All right, here we go. All right, so just like you've seen in a lot of the other videos, we've got the unit itself here on top. It's a nice size keyboard. You know, it's the keyboard feel and travel is very different from the Commodore 64 or other keyboards that I've used. It's really rather more like a Mac keyboard than anything, I think, as far as the travel goes. But there's a decent amount of weight to it. It feels pretty solid. I can see all the connections in the back. The micro SD card that has the operating system on it, really small. I don't know if you can see that there. I can hold it up here. Already pre-inserted, and it has the nice kind of springy eject rather than the scrapey kind of insertion feel that you get from a typical Raspberry Pi, so I appreciate that. Anyway, so keyboard looks nice, feels solid, doesn't rattle. If I shake it, it feels like it's solid. I know you're not supposed to shake Christmas presents or whatever. This is a little bit early for me for Christmas, but I couldn't resist. Inside the box, we've got you know, a Raspberry Pi power supply and the official mouse, which I will open. The power supply I'm going to save for right now. I've got a power supply in reserve already set up here, so we're not going to need to use that. And same thing with the HDMI cable. There's an HDMI cable in here as well that I'm not going to need immediately. So I'll kind of shove that back in. We have the official Raspberry Pi beginner's guide here. It looks like something on the order of 250 pages. I think that'll be fun just to kind of take my time and go through, even though I've probably experimented with a lot of these things already in other contexts. I think just taking the time to explore these things would be fun. It looks like I need to cut the tape on this, so I'm going to pause just for a second while I get something that I can use to do that properly. All right, that took more work than I wanted to get that little mouse box open. I did prepare myself with a knife or anything, but I didn't want to just destroy the packing material like I would have done as a kid. The mouse is, pretty standard corded mouse. Color scheme matches the rest of the unit. It's the cord is a little on the short side. I think probably most folks will want to use a cordless mouse with this device maybe, but it's kind of nice to have everything together in there. So there we are. Cool. So let me move my regular keyboard a bit more out of the way. So get this guy plugged in here. I think most people are going to use the USB 2 port for the mouse and then reserve the others for devices that can take advantage of more speed. I've got another Raspberry Pi that's sitting on here that I was just using for testing. That's got the Ethernet cable. I can get that plugged in. And HDMI. I don't know which port is the one to use, so I'm just going to guess that it's the one closest to the power inlet, but we'll find out. And let me go ahead and turn HDMI on here, and we'll see what happens when I connect this. I've got a green light that showed up, and it looks like we're going to be able to see what this first boot looks like. Got a blinking cursor. Rebooting in 5 seconds. It's resized the root file system. I guess that's normal. I've seen that with Diet Pi anyway. There's sort of the Raspberry Pi BIOS screen. I forget what the proper name is for that. Blinking cursor. Very exciting seeing this thing boot up for the first time, at least for me anyway. All right, the mouse, it's a little jumpy, but it seems to work okay. I'm going to press next to get started. I'm going to go ahead and, looks like the wheel for the mouse works okay. Oops, a little touchy. United States, I'm going to go with English. Time zone is Los Angeles is close enough for me. use English language, use US keyboard. I guess that's I did buy the US model, the US version of this keyboard and the keyboard layout, so a few different countries that are possible, but I went with US. Bought this from pieshop.us. Took a couple of weeks for it to show up. Wants me to put in a password. I'll put in something temporary for now. All right. This screen shows a black border around the desktop. I guess it does. I've heard that clicking this can cause things to go crazy. We'll test it out and see what happens, though. I'm not sure why it's asking for a wireless network since I have a wired network connected anyway. Let me look and see if there's any blinking lights. I don't see any blinking lights. We'll do some troubleshooting and see if this is normal. But I think I'm going to click skip here because I don't really need a wireless network. Now it's going to check to see if there are any updates required. Probably are. I guess if a network connection, if the wired network connection wasn't working, then this wouldn't, then this step here wouldn't be happening. So I think we're in good shape as far as networking goes. I can bring up a terminal window here in a bit to do some checking and see. Oh, there's a terminal window right there. So I mean, it looks like we're able to ping things, so I feel like networking is good, just with a wired networking connection. So I may edit some of this stuff out if it's taking a long time for it to download updates, or speed it up anyway. This is a little, the mouse is a little touchy for me. See, we've got our full 4 gigs of memory here. There's our 4 cores. Oh, that's a Diet Pi thing. Some information about the CPU and the D-message output. Honestly, this preview screen that I'm looking at here is probably smaller than what you're looking at, so it's a little tough for me to see all of this stuff. But all right, cool. I did tell it that I see a black border. I don't know if that will go away later on, or if this is just a feature of the capture card that I'm using for all of this stuff, but we'll see how this works. Oops, wrong button. Python 2.7, ancient stuff. Do we have a Python 3? We have Python 3.7.3, so that's good. I've normally used PyEnv to manage Python installations rather than messing about with the system Python on this thing, but I'll probably do a little bit of Docker container development. I'll probably do some Ansible development on this thing. I wonder if we do have Git installed, so I can check out some of the repos that I'm working on and mess about with that. Didn't have that stuff back in 1983, that's for sure. This update process is maybe dead, I'm not really sure. Doesn't look like it's making a ton of progress. I'm not really kind of a big fan of these GUI updaters. I'd rather just run something on the command line so that I can see what's going on, but I guess it's doing something. Maybe. I mean, there's one core that's basically pegged by dpackage, so I guess it's working okay. The CPU is not overall, since we're only using one core, the CPU is not overall super busy. People said that the keyboards, the keys were a little bit close together on this keyboard, but you know, if I look at it, let me pull up my other camera here so that I can. This is my Happy Hacking keyboard that I use in my daily work, and I'm comparing the two side by side, and you know, I don't think that the key spread or the distance between the keys is significantly tighter. Overall width of my Happy Hacking keyboard is maybe a few millimeters wider on each side, and I have maybe more function keys. The enter key on my Happy Hacking keyboard is a little bit bigger, but overall the space bar is definitely, the height of the space bar on the Raspberry Pi keyboard is larger than on my Happy Hacking keyboard, at least the touchable surface on the top. You know, I don't feel like it's a much smaller keyboard. It's not like typing on my netbook's keyboard, for example, or anything that's awkward like that. So, you know, I think it's pretty reasonable. All right, have we finished? Are we good? Let me go back here and see. Helps to use the right mouse. Yeah, this I'm not convinced that this is doing anything useful at this point. Well, hang on. Maybe it is. Maybe it just had a really large amount of updates. The networking connection seems like it's good, so let me try. Just looking on my local network here to see. I mean, there's no issue with getting to the default gateway. Latency looks good, less than a millisecond. So I'm looking on the actual keyboard itself. Bring that. And I'm seeing some, I don't know if you can see it here, but I'm seeing some kind of random flickering activity on the power LED. I don't know if that indicates disk I/O or CPU activity. I've heard a number of theories. I haven't researched it to find out what it actually indicates. But definitely seeing some irregular on-off activity with what the keyboard shows as a power LED. I haven't looked to see what, I think this is probably pretty standard Raspberry Pi OS kinds of things. We've got a Java IDE, Scratch, which would have been a ton of fun for me back in 1983 to play with. It's still pretty interesting. My son and I did some Scratch projects for his schoolwork a number of years ago. It was fun to play with. We have the Chromium web browser, VNC viewer, haven't used that in a while, VLC, game. So honestly, I used my Commodore 64, certainly in my high school time. I used it a lot for typing homework assignments. My father later bought me a dot matrix printer that I could use for printing out those homework assignments and turning them in. I was one of the very few kids in my class that had the ability to kind of do word processing at home. The word processor that I used on my Commodore 64 was something that I typed in from Compute magazine. It was called, I want to say it was called SpeedScript or something along those lines. Anyway, very basic word processor. I mean, the whole computer itself with nothing running at all only had about 39 kilobytes of storage free. And then after you put in the word processor took maybe 5 or 6 kilobytes of memory. And so, I mean, you couldn't type massive papers, but it was adequate for the schoolwork that I was doing. And then I could save things very quickly onto floppy disk and then print them out on the serial attached printer. Back in those days, Commodore 64 had only one I/O port on the back that was a serial protocol I/O port, and then you daisy-chained devices. So I think I had that port connected to my floppy drive, and then out of the floppy drive, well, there was a serial connection that went to the printer. So kind of an interesting arrangement. Really amazing to me that any of that stuff worked at all, but it didn't. And later I had a 1200 baud modem that plugged into kind of the game port on the back of the Commodore 64, kind of where the GPIO pins are on this keyboard. And I used that to connect up to some BBS systems and talked with people who were enthusiastic about computer stuff. Some folks at the local university. Didn't really do anything significant on the BBS, didn't get into like swapping software or online gaming or anything weird like that. It was just me just being curious about technology and exploring the stuff. And that was a lot of fun. Of course, we don't need a modem with this computer. This computer is enjoying a gigabit connection to the internet via the wired network connection that I have here. So network connectivity is a solved problem here in 2020, where it was very, very, very new and very, very slow back in 1983, where it existed at all. In spite of our fast speeds here, the installation speed for doing these updates is depressingly slow. So I will probably cut out a fair bit of this. But yeah, it looks like there's a nice assortment of applications for somebody getting started. Again, I think this is just standard Raspberry Pi OS type of stuff. But as far as, a nice first install, first boot experience, I think this is something that that a lot of folks, maybe some kids that were my age back in 1983, some kids of a similar age this year in 2020 will be opening the Raspberry Pi 400 under their Christmas tree and having a first boot experience and a good time, same as what I did back then. I hope that these updates don't discourage them, but I guess maybe you have other toys to play with, or while the updates are running, we could spend some time kind of reading this book and taking a look at what's in here. There's it looks like a lot of the I know that this book was updated for the Pi 400. Let me put my camera on. This book was updated for the Pi 400, but certainly there are in some of the hardware pictures we see both the regular Raspberry Pi and the Pi 400 pictured. There is a diagram here that shows the regular Raspberry Pi and all the different parts and identifies what the chips are, which is pretty cool. But that's specific to the regular Raspberry Pi. But I think it's really helpful for somebody who's curious to understand what are the different parts of a computer and how they all fit together, how they communicate. I think this is really a great book. I'm looking forward to, I remember my Commodore 64 manual and going through that meticulously page by page as a kid, and I'm looking forward to exploring some of the stuff and then maybe sharing some of the things with my nephew or with friends who are just interested in getting started with computing. I think this is a tremendous resource and so inexpensive, right? Way more affordable than I'm sure my original Commodore 64 was. I think I'm trying to remember what the price was, but I think just the keyboard itself was $150 or $200, and then the display and the floppy disk drive were as much again. That so around about $700 or so for a Commodore 64 kind of kit, and close to $1,000 back in 1983 for all of that plus a printer. So not an insignificant investment. And if you translate that to today's dollars, that's I think it's like $2,500 or something like that. So you're starting to get into kind of MacBook Pro money at that point. All right, so it says we are up to date. I'm going to go ahead and restart. Fingers crossed that this is going to be good. I'm looking at the power LED. It's blinking very rapidly right now. I see just a cursor frozen on the screen. There we go. That's kind of that bootloader screen. The frame buffer test, I guess, is what that splash of color was there. And waiting with bated breath. Oh, the background looks like it's nice and full size now. It's taking up the whole screen, so that's good. We'll see if we get any more information. The mouse is quite speedy. The amount of motion that I have to put on my desk here. If I just move the mouse just a tiny bit, you can see I'm only moving it just a few degrees, and it's going from one side of the screen to the other. So I'm not that dexterous. I may look and see if there's a way to tune that up a little bit. Let's see what apt says here. So I'm a little bit more used to staring at things from a command line perspective. Presumably all the upgrades will have been done. Yep, 0 upgraded. Everything's good. It says that there are some maps that I could clean up, but otherwise I'm good. We have a kind of normal version of Vim. Any Emacs? We don't have Emacs. Emacs is not on by default, but I'm sure you could install it if you were so inclined. Yeah, overall, I mean, this is, you know, I mean, graphics look like they're pretty responsive. I think this is going to be a blast to play with. I've read that there's a VS Code build for this, so you can run VS Code on here. I may experiment with that. Like I said, messing around with some Docker containers and some Ansible automation. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. The keyboard seems quite usable to me. I don't put it in the same class as my Happy Hacker keyboard, which was considerably more than twice as much as this whole computer. But I don't. I mean, it has a nice. The texture on the key tops is nice. It doesn't feel like the paint's going to wear off. It might even be, you know, kind of embossed in there. I'm not sure about how the keyboard was put together. I know that I did wear the letters on the key caps of my Commodore 64 off with all of my typing on it, especially the little kind of glyphs that were on the front of the keycaps. My nails, I guess, would scrape on them, and so I have a lot of ink missing from my Commodore 64 keyboard before it finally went on to the great keyboard grave in the sky. But anyway, I hope this has been interesting. You can kind of see what it's like to switch on one of these things for the first time. And if you are interested in technology, I hope that you either get one or consider buying one for a kid in your life, a nephew, a child, a grandchild, to inspire their interest in curiosity and technology. I know that this sort of thing inspired me greatly growing up and set me on a path for success that I'm still grateful for. So thanks for watching.